This is OwlUp, where learning happens in minutes, not hours. For a deeper journey, explore all our courses at owlup.co. Now, let's dive in. Welcome back to Chapter 3 of our microeconomics series, where we're diving into the fascinating world of individual choices. In this episode, titled The Elasticity Concept, we'll explore how to calculate price elasticity of demand and supply, giving you the tools to understand consumer behavior and market dynamics. So, let's get started. A tiny change in price can quietly move crowds of buyers, or leave them unfazed. Gas prices jump, flights go on sale, a streaming app bumps its fee, and yet our reactions aren't equal. Why do small nudges in cost sometimes trigger stampedes, and other times barely a shrug? Sometimes a 10% price hike barely dents sales. Other times, that same 10% wipes out half the customers. The missing piece is not just that buyers react, but how strongly. And that strength isn't random. It follows patterns tied to habits, alternatives, and time. This is where the concept of elasticity steps in. It doesn't just say people are sensitive to price or they're not. It puts a number on that sensitivity. That number tells a policymaker how much a cigarette tax will actually cut smoking, or a retailer how far they can discount before profit margins snap. Think of airline tickets during holidays, rideshare surge pricing, or flash sales on apps you use daily. Behind each of these is an implicit bet on elasticity, how far behavior will bend when economic conditions shift. Our goal now is to turn that invisible lever into something you can see and eventually use. Retailers, governments, and platforms like Amazon constantly bet on these behavioral patterns, sometimes with precise data, sometimes with rough guesses. A slight tweak to a tax rate, a limited-time discount, or a subscription price change is rarely random. It's usually based on an elasticity estimate, even if no one says the word out loud. Gasoline taxes, cigarette regulations, dynamic pricing in rideshares, and personalized product recommendations all hinge on how sharply quantities respond. To see what's really happening, we need to separate direction of change from magnitude, and then measure that magnitude. Start with the core move elasticity makes. It turns loose reactions into precise ratios. Instead of saying, gas buyers don't react much, we say, a 10% price increase in the short run cuts gasoline demand by only about 1 to 3%. That's a price elasticity between negative 0.1 and negative 0.3. Stretch the horizon to years, when people can buy smaller cars, move closer to work, or switch transit, and that response can reach negative 0.7. Same product, same direction of price change, but very different numerical response once people have time to reorganize their lives. The same logic lets us distinguish markets that look similar but behave differently once we measure them. Cigarettes and gasoline are both everyday items, both often taxed, and both politically sensitive. Yet policymakers work with very different numbers. For cigarettes, U.S. estimates hover around negative 0.4. Raise cigarette taxes by 10%, and consumption falls by roughly 4% on average. That's enough to matter for health, but not so large that tax revenues collapse. Budget offices use those elasticities to forecast how much money a new tax will bring in, and how much smoking will likely decline. On the business side, firms run constant experiments to uncover where demand is more stretchy. Amazon's recommendation engine is a striking example. Research suggests it lifted sales by about 35%, partly by steering shoppers toward items where a small nudge, placement, visibility, a tweak in price, generates a large change in quantity sold. Behind the scenes, that means finding products with higher elasticity and giving them prime digital shelf space. Elasticity also connects what happens in individual shopping carts to long-run structural change. Meat, for instance, has an average income elasticity around 0.6 in richer OECD countries. A 10% rise in income translates into about 6% more meat demand. In many lower-income countries, that number exceeds 1. As incomes grow, demand there rises more than proportionally, reshaping global markets for protein, land use, and even climate policy. Your challenge this week: whenever you see a price change, Don't stop at up or down. Ask, if this moved 10%, how much would quantity realistically move? 1%? 5%? 20%? Then check news, company reports, or policy documents to see if anyone has actually estimated that response. Think about movie tickets versus your favorite streaming subscription. When theaters offer $5 Tuesdays, seats can suddenly fill up. A modest discount pulls in students, budget-conscious families, and people who are on the fence. But if your streaming app nudges its monthly fee up by 5%, you might grumble and stay, especially if all your shows and watch lists live there. Same basic setup, entertainment spending, but very different room to move before people change their plans. Firms quietly map these differences. A gym might run steep temporary discounts on day passes, drawing in flexible users who watch prices closely, while keeping long-term membership rates steadier because cancellations are costly and inconvenient for members. Airlines do something similar with basic economy versus fully flexible tickets. One group of travelers responds sharply to small price shifts, the other pays more for stability, not savings. Each of these choices is a bet on where behavior is most ready to bend. Elasticity quietly shapes who bears the cost of big transitions. As AI sets prices like a chess engine, probing, adjusting, learning, some customers face personalized offers that change faster than any sale sign. Carbon policies do something similar for firms. Higher costs push managers to redesign production, not just cut output. When supply chains get more flexible, sudden shocks look less like earthquakes and more like controlled demolitions. Disruptive, but planned, budgeted, and absorbed. Elasticity also maps power. When a few platforms control your choices, responses can be muted even if you'd like to switch. As new apps, payment tools, and gig options appear, those escape routes widen and the numbers quietly shift. Tracking those shifts is like watching fault lines form under prices, wages, and even your next job offer. Here's your challenge this week. Pick one product you regularly use, like your daily coffee, streaming subscription, or rideshare, and run a mini elasticity experiment on yourself. For the next 7 days, intentionally change the price you're willing to pay. Set a strict cap, for example, no coffee over $3.50, and track exactly how many times you still buy versus skip. At the end of the week, calculate your personal elasticity by comparing how your quantity demanded, how many times you bought, changed with your self-imposed price limit, and write a 2 to 3 sentence conclusion about how elastic or inelastic your own behavior turned out to be. This was OwlUp, your daily step forward. This series continues with more chapters on OwlUp.co. Visit OwlUp.co to access the complete course and continue your learning journey. See you there!